Massive scandal breaks out weeks ahead of November 5th polling. Kamala Harris accused of plagiarism in 2009 book titled Smart on Crime. Early in-person voting gets underway in the swing state of Georgia, another critical battleground state of North Carolina, to kick off early in-person voting this week. All right, 21 days to go to the race to the White House. Two critical battleground states, that's Georgia and North Carolina, are kicking off early in-person voting this week. In Georgia, voters can head to the ballot box starting Tuesday, and early in-person voting begins in North Carolina later this week. In Georgia, new laws have expanded early in-person opportunities. Fewer drop boxes are now available, making the option less appealing. Meanwhile, North Carolina is still reeling from the damage caused by Hurricane Helen. As both campaigns make their final pitches, Kamala Harris will participate in a radio town hall and an event with black entrepreneurs in Michigan. Donald Trump is headed to Georgia to participate in a town hall with women. In fact, Donald Trump's call for army to handle enemies on election day has sparked outrage. Blue camp has slammed the former president for saying armed forces should turn against enemy within when voters go to polls. There's been a huge backlash to Donald Trump's enemy within comment, and he has suggested that the army must come up against the enemy within, quote unquote. Take a look at this report that tells you the story in detail. We come back and talk more on that.
I believe so strongly that a second Trump term would be a huge risk for America and dangerous. Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged.
With only 20 days left to the final verdict, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has landed himself in yet another political face-off. This time, he made controversial claims about who he sees as a potential threat on the big election day. In a recent interview with Fox News, Trump said the real chaos won't come from foreign actors or his own supporters, but from what he referred to as radical left lunatics. Trump further suggested that if things spiral out of control, the National Guard or even the military might need to be called in to maintain order. Trump's comments drew a strong reaction from Kamala Harris's campaign.
And he is out for unchecked power. That's what he's looking for. He wants to send the military after American citizens.
Trump continued his hardline stance on immigration, describing immigrants as a threat to the country and framing them as part of the problem. Trump is no stranger to controversy, especially after the events of January 6, 2021, when his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. However, when asked if he expected any trouble from his base, Trump dismissed the idea, saying that his supporters wouldn't be the ones causing problems. As Trump continues to deny any wrongdoing in the January 6th insurrection and faces multiple legal battles for attempting to overturn the 2020 election results, he has made it clear that he would go after political opponents if he wins in 2024. Trump even hinted at prosecuting election officials as political operatives who he believes could cheat. As November 5th approaches, Trump's rhetoric shows no signs of cooling down. With Riddha Makedia, Samia Afsar for NDTV World.
All right, let's discuss this story in greater detail. The impact this could have on the election. What exactly does Donald Trump's messaging is all about? And can the Democrat camp really use this to its advantage? Jake Novak, who's a political analyst, joining me from New York City. Chona Plank, former advisor to President Biden. He's joining me from Washington, D.C. And Matt Klink, representing the Republican side, joining me from L.A. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for speaking to NDTV World. And let me start with you, Matt, simply because at the end of the day, you need to do the heavy lifting here to tell us what exactly Donald Trump meant when he said that he would bring out the army as far as those election results are concerned. Because sitting here in New Delhi, what one wonders is the leader of the free world, whoever may be, is talking on terms which normally third world countries or tin pot dictators really talk about. But go ahead, make your point, sir.
Well, thank you for that lovely lead-in. Look, I'll say a couple things. One, to state the obvious, Donald Trump doesn't hold power right now. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris hold power. They control the military. Two, what I do find interesting is that Donald Trump's statements are always taken in a vacuum as if nothing else has occurred. You have to remember that this is a man who has had 2 assassination attempts against him. This is also a man who has endured, significant criticism from Joe Biden and from Kamala Harris. They've called him a threat to democracy, a fascist, a pseudo-fascist, unhinged. So, look, this election right now is all about mobilizing base voters. There are no more undecideds in America. The question now is who turns out and votes on Election Day. And Donald Trump is going to use every tool in his toolbox, just like Mrs. Harris is using.
Absolutely. Both candidates are entitled to that. But I want to ask you a follow-up question before I get in the other 2 panelists, which is about the messaging that the former president is trying to send here. Is that a fear, or is there more to this?
Is that a fear to whom? Look, I think that what Donald Trump is doing, he is going to motivate his base. His base believes strongly that the Biden administration has engaged in a calculated lawfare against the president, and they have abused the legal system against Donald Trump. And he's going to use every means at his disposal to turn out the base. And that's what he's doing right now. And it is working because Donald Trump is surging and Kamala Harris is increasingly more desperate.
Okay, let's take that to Jonna to represent the other side. And then, Jake, I'm going to give you the, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity to come in here. Mr. Blank, the fact is that as polls stand right now, most of the bump up that Kamala Harris had immediately after her announcement seems to have sort of waned, and at this stage it's a neck and neck dead heat for both the candidates. Is that one of the reasons why some of the messaging coming in from the Democrat camp is so strident against Donald Trump?
Well, it is a neck and neck race, and it will be right up until Election Day. But this is a truly pivot in American history. Donald Trump truly is a fundamental threat to American democracy. And it's not me saying that. It's not Kamala Harris saying that. It's not Joe Biden saying that. It's America's top military leaders under Donald Trump himself. General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Esper, Mr. Trump's own Secretary of Defense, General John Kelly, his own chief of staff, have all said these things. Military officials straight up and down the line who served under Trump have been reinforcing the message that this is not the American tradition and that the second term of Donald Trump will be far more dangerous than a first term.
But okay, Jake, then let me ask you this, that it doesn't look like, Donald Trump is really making a rallying call for roll the tanks. It's of course none of that. But what the 2 sides of this debate is, you've heard that. But way in here, how do you see Donald Trump really in terms of the message here? Is he just saying that at the end of the day, I am up against the entire establishment, the establishment being Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are in power, or is there more to that?
Well, let me calm your viewers down with some reality here. What Donald Trump is saying is that there's violence on Election Day. If there are terror attacks on Election Day, and by the way, the FBI just arrested an Afghani man for planning a terror attack on Election Day. He's saying if there's violence on Election Day, if there's terror on Election Day, then the National Guard needs to be called out to restore calm and order in the country, and not by him. It needs to be called out by President Biden.
But what's
and
wrong with that
administration.
then? I think that then,
So there's nothing wrong with that. And let me just say something, guys. I was a television news executive producer for 30 years. And whenever one of my writers put in copy that something was unprecedented, that something had done something for the first time in history, I basically told them, you're probably wrong, and you should never write that in a script. Anybody saying that Donald Trump talking about violence on Election Day, worries about that, is unprecedented, is it a historical ignoramus? In this country, especially during the Reconstruction after the Civil War, there was a tremendous amount of violence that was threatened on election days for many, many years after the Civil War. President Ulysses Grant had to send in the U.S. Army to defeat the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, on a number of occasions. It really irks me when people don't know enough about American history to get excited about things. And listing the names of generals and talking about how Donald Trump is a threat to democracy when he's running against a candidate who was not chosen by a democratic process is an egregious misrepresentation and hypocritical in a grand way. I want everyone to calm down right now, study a little bit of history, and stop trying to frighten the national and international audience. That is your responsibility, and that's the responsibility of all of us speaking on this election right now.
Absolutely, sir. Which is why all sides are getting equal representation and enough time. I'm giving everybody a chance to represent, and that's the first question I asked. That it's not like Trump is saying it's not a rallying call for roll the tanks on the street. It's none of that. I said that, but Mr. Blank can respond to that. The one thing that Jake mentioned, which is that the Democrat campaign is essentially talking about democracy under threat under Trump, when Kamala Harris hasn't been chosen as a Democrat candidate, but sort of as a parachute candidate, a lot of people are saying. That's the first part. And the second part that what Jake said right now, which is that it's just about National Guard coming in at a time of fluidity, political uncertainty in the country.
Well, that's not at all what the discussion is. And since we have two Trump supporters, I think I really should get twice as much time here. As Mr. Novak said, we have had political violence in the past, but it's never been directed by a candidate for presidency. It's never been by a former president of the United States. It's always been on presidents trying to tamp down physical violence and use the military to maintain order, not calling on the U.S. military to establish what he himself has said is a dictatorship on day one. So I think we really have to look at, have we ever had a president who has attempted to stage a coup d'etat before? We've had one, Donald Trump. That has not happened before.
Okay. I gave you time. As I said, I'm going to give everybody a chance to respond and share their view and put their view out. And stay with me because I want to address several other stories. They all weave in together for the larger who is going to win this in 20 days. But I'm going to put out some of those other stories as well. Stay with me, gentlemen. I want to address the other story, which is about Kamala Harris ramping up efforts to win black male voters. In fact, Kamala Harris, the Democrat presidential nominee, has released Opportunity Agenda that's aimed at black men. The Opportunity Agenda is primarily to ensure that the rents are lowered, they get some aids for being able to pay up the down payment, also legalize marijuana at the federal level. It's right now at the state level, and there's also some talk about giving some loans to about 50, 60 odd black men, the total amount being $1 million. And the first federal ban on corporate price gouging is also being talked about, and a national health equity initiative is what Kamala Harris is saying. But to me, what it looks like is more talk of identity politics. Sitting in New Delhi, I can go on and on and on about identity politics, but what I can say is halfway around the world, that's exactly what I am seeing here. Mr. Blank, let me give you a chance to respond to that.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we see identity politics from both candidates. And the Democrats have lost a lot of ground, at least in the polls, with African-American voters and with Latin voters. And this is going to be a real problem for the Democrats if they don't make that up somewhere else. We've seen the most persistent identity politics, however, coming from Mr. Trump himself in ways that are really rather dark and rather frightening.
Okay, respond to that, Matt, about identity politics pretty much being at the center of this election.
That's rich, Jonah, coming from a Biden-Harris administration that wanted to forgive student loans to help turn out the youth vote, which was found illegal twice and has been stopped dead in its tracks. Now, in an act of supreme desperation, because she's hemorrhaging black male voters, not only does she propose to give more government handouts, but she has the lecturer-in-chief, Barack Obama, talk about, and these are his words, not mine, talking about the brothers don't want to vote for a woman. They realize that the Democrats realize that they are hemorrhaging young black voters, not because they're not getting handouts, but because the Biden-Harris economy is so bad that everything costs more. Don't forget the definition of Biden-Harrisonomics. You pay more to live less. They are hemorrhaging black voters. They're hemorrhaging Latino voters, specifically male voters, and they're losing them in record numbers. And that's why, again, Donald Trump is surging across the United States, but especially in the 7 swing states.
Jake, connect the dots for us here. One would imagine that a first woman of color as the presidential candidate being able to reach to or convey her message to the black voters would be that much easier for Kamala Harris as against Donald Trump. But connect the dots. What is it that we are missing in terms of her messaging that it's coming down to this?
What you're missing is the disdain for the voters. You know, I'm not in favor of criminalizing marijuana. I think it should be decriminalized. I've been in favor of decriminalizing it for 30 years. But that's one point I want to really highlight in her so-called message to black male voters. This is exactly how little they think of them. They think that decriminalizing marijuana, legalizing marijuana at the federal level is something that's good for them. I can't imagine something that thinks of people in a more disdainful and sets a lower bar for people than that. Again, I don't want to criminalize. I don't want people in jail for possession or even for selling a small amount to a friend. Don't get me wrong. I don't believe in that, and I never have. But that's the one part of this proposal which really shows you what they think of black men. They think they're pathetic. This is like bread and circuses at the Roman era, but at least in bread and circuses, you got some good gladiator fights that everybody wanted to see. The fact is, this is a handout a policy, and the reason why she's not connecting with black male voters is not because of her policies. It's because she's an ineffective communicator. She cannot connect with voters of any kind, black, white, rich, or poor.
Okay, there's more story on the black lawmakers. In fact, we're staying with identity politics in America. That's a story we are dwelling deep in. But there's more news coming in there, which is that black lawmakers have called for probe of the GOP House candidate. And the Michigan Legislative Black Caucus has called for probe on Tom Barrett. The probe is over the ad that he has given, where he's given a wrong election date. Instead of 5th of November, he's actually put it 6th of November. One would think that the American voters are smart enough to know whom they're going to vote. Of course, they would know the date, but there are factors here involved. The attention to detail is important, and the fact that the charge against him is that he's purposely, on intent, misleading a certain segment of voters by targeting them. Respond to that, Matt.
First time hearing of it. Again, don't forget, we have 435 House members, and I'm in California, not in Michigan. I will tell you, as one who cuts these ads and places these ads for candidates, it is typically not an effective strategy to run ads that have the wrong election date. Rather than thinking that what we say is Occam's razor, the simplest solution is usually the most logical solution. I'm willing to bet that somebody probably screwed up and the ad's probably already off the air. But look, they're entitled to run. They're entitled to investigate it.
Fire the ad agency, fire the creative director. That's the first thing.
I would chalk it up to I would chalk it up to stupidity and an error more than nefariousness.
Okay.
It's a poor use of campaign resources, I'll put it that way.
Okay. In fact, one were to talk about news, well, there's lots coming in from the Fox News network as well, leaning towards the Republicans. They are now set to have a sit-down interview with Kamala Harris. It's a dramatic moment, in fact. There's a recent media blitz that the Democratic presidential nominee has been on. And well, of course, it has led to sharp reactions coming in from Donald Trump. Was expected, but there it has come. And he's also slammed Harris of election desperation. But at the same time, he slammed the network, saying you've been going very weak and soft on Democrats. But at the end of the day, well, the networks need to hedge their risks. Isn't that what it is all about, Jonah?
Well, we have a media environment where one station, Fox News, is clearly a propaganda outfit. We have several others.
Then why is Kamala Harris going there?
I'm sure it was very controversial within her camp, but the rationale for going is that even though this is basically a propaganda outfit, there are millions of Americans who get their news from Fox News. You don't see Donald Trump going on MSNBC, which is a left-of-center news outlet. Would Donald Trump be welcome there? Of course he would. Would Kamala Harris be welcome on Fox? Yes, obviously. Is it wise for them to go there? Well, they reach millions of people.
Okay, let's take that tweet of Donald Trump full frame where he's reacted very sharply because, you know, it's Fox and he has a view on it that's very strong. And viewers can see that tweet. I'm not going to read that. But Jake, respond to the fact that, well, networks are entitled to hedge their risks. It's a very close election. No one knows who's going to win. So that's what they're doing here.
Oh, it's not about hedging your bets. It's about getting ratings. I mean, the presidential candidate going for her first interview that won't be from a friendly interviewer. I mean, that's gold. Anybody would want that. So that's the biggest reason. It's not about hedging bets. And I think it's clear. I think Donald Trump's first part of his statement is correct. The second part I would take issue with. The first part being, that she's showing some desperation. There's a lot of people who absolutely see it that way. I do as well. There's no way that she would agree to this interview if she felt that campaign felt like they were winning. So that's the first part. The second part, though, about Fox helping Kamala Harris out or something along those lines, I think he's wrong about that. First of all, I know Bret Baier. And Bret Baier is going to ask some pointed questions, but he is a consummate gentleman. And I think that there's some hope among the Harris campaign and the Democrats that they'll be able to see some kind of nastiness during this interview. And they'll be able to cut some sound bites out of it, put it on social media, and do something along the lines of, look how strong Kamala Harris was against this attack dog. That's not going to happen with Bret Baier. It's going to be a very respectful interview. So that's not going to happen.
Okay.
And so that's one. So I actually think Fox is going to end up helping the Trump campaign, not because it wants to. I'm sure they would like him to win, but not with this interview, because it's not going to be the kind of event where Kamala Harris is able to show how strong she is in pushing back on Bret Baier. Bret Baier will not give her that kind of a personal hard time.
All right. Okay. So, yes, but, you know, one hopes that the biggest criticism that Kamala Harris has been facing, which is that she hasn't been a good orator in terms of putting her view across at multiple forums that she's been going to, probably some of those criticisms she could address. One sees that a lot on social media, but of course remains to be seen whether it's cutting any ice with the voters. Matt, quick word from you on that in terms of the Fox controversy.
Well, I don't think there's any controversy. The Harris camp has made a conscious decision to get her out of the teleprompter canned speeches and have her do more media. Last week, it was a disaster. She was edited heavily by 60 Minutes. She giggled repeatedly on Stephen Colbert, and she answered in her typical Kamala Harris word salad. And these were all friendly media outlets. Now she's going on Fox again because her campaign is struggling. And I'm happy she's doing it. I wish she had done this early.
I think what the most convincing argument till now has been, to me, is what Jake said, that if the Democrat camp thought that they've been able to send the message across, they probably wouldn't go to the Fox network right now. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. We've addressed a bunch of stories here, and we're going to keep doing that. Just 20 days left for the election. But a quick update on another story coming in, which is that days after the Democrat U.S. presidential nominee Kamala Harris challenged her Republican rival to release his medical records, Donald Trump has now responded on Truth Social, saying the vice president is dying to see my cholesterol. I've put out more medical exams than any other president in history, Donald Trump said on Truth Social while attacking Harris for parts of her medical history being released by her office. Remember, this was a big slugfest between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, where Donald Trump had asked Joe Biden to release his medical records because he had claimed and said repeatedly that he wasn't fit to run for office again. So that's the same controversy playing again, but this time it is Kamala Harris asking Donald Trump, who's the older of the two candidates. All right, that's all the time we have in this edition. Thanks so much for watching.
Motorola Edge 50 Pro, world's first AI-powered pro-grade camera.